Do you trust me? That is the question that has never ceased echoing through the corridors of time. I heard it not in the thunder nor the wind, but in the stillness between heartbeats. And when I did, I knew it was not spoken to mankind alone, but to me. For every soul that enters this world is asked the same thing, over and over again, through trial and loss and waiting. Faith, I was shown, is not a word in Scripture. It is the pulse of creation itself. It is the unseen current that sustains every atom, every heartbeat, every motion of the stars. And yet, men have forgotten. They trust only what they can hold. They believe only what they can measure. And so the inner flame flickers while the outer world trembles. When I looked into the records of souls, I saw that this question, do you trust me, has always been the gate between bondage and freedom. Abraham heard it when he left the familiar land. Noah heard it when he built under a clear sky. Moses heard it before the Red Sea parted. And you even now hear it in your own way, though you may not recognize its voice. For God speaks not through thunder, but through circumstance. The loss of a job, the silence after prayer, the sickness that lingers, all of these are the modern tongue of the same eternal question. When fear rises and reason fails, when the horizon darkens and the mind cannot explain what is happening, that is when the soul must answer. The world today is full of noise and trembling. I have seen in vision how the frequency of human thought has been lowered by fear, and fear is the shadow twin of faith. Both are creative energies. One builds, the other destroys. What you expect, you invite. What you believe, you become. The outer storms that rage across nations are but reflections of the inner storms men refuse to master. Yet above them all, the divine still whispers, do you trust me? When I first began to read for others, I was often shown how faith works like a law, not an emotion. It is not hope, not wish, but alignment. I saw like patterns form around a person the moment they truly believed. Not the belief that says, I will try, but the belief that says, it is done. And around those who doubted, the same light grew dim, pulsing uncertainly, as if awaiting permission to act. Then it became clear, faith is the permission the soul gives God to move. Without it, even heaven waits. The material world is only the echo of the unseen. As above, so below. As within, so without. Every man's circumstances are the shadows of his faith or his fear. The mind is the builder, but faith is the builder's blueprint. When you trust, you align your mind with divine geometry, and life begins to assemble itself in order. When you doubt, you distort that pattern, and confusion multiplies. I once asked in the silence, why is faith necessary? Why not reveal all truth so men may believe without effort? And the answer came not in words, but in vibration. Because without faith, the soul cannot awaken. If all were visible, the heart would never learn vision. The eye of faith must open before the eye of flesh can see. It is the training of divine sight, the first discipline of co-creation. This is why God hides himself behind the veil of the ordinary to teach us to see with something deeper than sight. In the records, I saw how faith is the foundation of every world, the architecture of reality. When the Spirit said, let there be light, faith was the vibration that carried the command into manifestation. The stars themselves are sustained by the same energy that moves through a believing heart. That is why doubt brings darkness. It severs the link between the human and the divine. When you pray and see no answer, it is not that God has not moved, but that your vibration has not yet met the frequency of his promise. The answer exists already in the unseen, waiting for the harmony of your trust to draw it forth. In the visions I was given, I saw that every soul has a field of light around it shaped like a seed. When faith awakens, the seed cracks open, and the living energy of spirit begins to flow through thought, word, and action. But when fear dominates, the seed hardens again, and the flow ceases. The world calls this delay. Heaven calls it protection. For God will not manifest what the heart does not truly believe. There is mercy, even in waiting. So when the outer world shakes, when men panic and cry that all is lost, I say this, It is not lost, it is revealing. Faith is not a wall against chaos, it is the recognition that chaos itself is God's sculptor. Out of the breaking comes the shaping. Every trial is the divine hand asking, "Do you trust me even now?" You must understand, the testing of faith is not punishment, it is measurement. It measures how much of the divine you can hold. The greater the trial, the greater the vessel being formed. And when the vessel is ready, what was withheld will pour in abundance. In one of my readings, the voice of the source said, "Man is not punished for his doubts, but by them. For doubt closes the window of the soul, and faith opens it. Light does not force its way in, it waits for invitation. That is why the entire history of humanity can be summarized in one question: will you trust the unseen?" I have read the records of kings and peasants alike, and those who rose above despair all shared one secret. They trusted when it made no sense to trust, and that trust became creative power. I tell you this plainly, for it is truth I have lived. Faith is not an emotion toward God, it is the movement of God's hand. It is the bridge between the invisible and the visible, the breath of spirit through the lungs of time. And even now, as you listen, the same question is being asked again, softly but unavoidably. Do you trust me? Faith, I was shown, is not the trembling of hope nor the whisper of emotion. It is a vibration that shapes reality itself. When the spirit within a man becomes certain of the unseen, matter begins to bend to that certainty. In my readings, I saw it again and again. Thoughts are seeds, and faith is the heat that causes them to germinate. Hope is the waiting of the heart, but faith is the command of the soul. Hope says, perhaps it will be. Faith says, it already is. The difference between the two is the distance between wishing and knowing. Faith is substance, not shadow. It has weight, density, and structure within the field of the unseen, and the soul that holds it firm becomes an instrument through which divine law takes form. I once asked in the quiet hours when the veil was thin, why do some who pray see miracles and others see silence? The answer came as a pulse, not a sentence. Faith has degrees of light, and only when the vibration of the soul matches the promise does manifestation appear. It is not that God withholds, but that man must learn to harmonize. You do not light a lamp with wet hands, you must first be dry with belief. So it is with prayer, it burns only where the air of faith is clear. I saw too that faith is never blind, though the world calls it so. It sees deeper than sight, for the eyes of flesh perceive the echo, while faith beholds the source. When one believes, truly believes, a spiritual geometry aligns. Every thought, every cell begins to vibrate toward completion. In the great records where the histories of souls are written, I watched this alignment as living light, building bridges between the invisible pattern and the visible world. Faith was the architect's hand tracing the design of creation. Every command of the Creator still hums with it. Let there be light was not a wish, but a certainty spoken into vibration. The same law moves through you each time you affirm what is true in spirit before you see it in matter. This is why Christ said, when you pray, believe that you have received it. He spoke of faith not as expectation, but as possession. The soul must claim before the hands can hold. There is power in such certainty, for it releases the creative forces within the subconscious, which is the builder of form. What the conscious mind affirms in faith, the deeper mind constructs in time. This is why doubt poisons creation. Doubt splits the pattern, and the builder no longer knows what to make. I have seen it as broken energy, forms that begin but never complete, lives that start but never arrive, all because the blueprint of trust was never finished. Faith, then, is not merely religion. It is the science of divine architecture. Every act, every word, every decision built in certainty strengthens the structure of destiny. When fear intrudes, it is like sand poured into mortar. It weakens the walls of manifestation. And so the soul must train itself to trust even when sight fails, to speak the word as already fulfilled, to thank before receiving, to act before seeing. That is not delusion. It is the law by which the unseen becomes the seen. Those who understand this no longer chase miracles, they generate them. For faith is not an appeal to a distant power. It is union with that power. In the stillness of meditation, when the mind yields its anxious grasp, faith becomes knowing, and knowing becomes creation. The Spirit spoke once to me, man was never meant to beg for light. He was meant to become its channel. And I understood that faith is the opening of that channel, the permission the soul gives God to express himself through form. The greater the faith, the wider the current flows. Many pray for strength, yet refuse to act. Many seek healing, yet feed the vibration of sickness through fear. Many desire guidance, yet will not still the mind long enough to hear. Faith demands action, because it is movement, not concept. To stand in faith is to walk toward the unseen door, knowing it will open because it already exists. Each time a man acts in that certainty, heaven answers through resonance. It may not appear at once, but the moment he believes, the pattern is set in motion. I have watched it unfold across lifetimes. The soul learns that its world is an echo of its own conviction. Believe in fear, and fear is made flesh. Believe in divine order, and order manifests around you. This is the sacred reciprocity between creator and creation, the endless rhythm of thought becoming thing. So do not think of faith as the fragile candle of religion. It is the furnace of worlds. It is the law by which God breathes through man, the bridge between what is spoken in heaven and what is built upon the earth. It is the secret language of power, the tone by which chaos is called into harmony. And once the soul learns to live by that tone, nothing in the outer world can truly shake it again. Abraham moved before he saw the land. Noah built before the first raindrop fell. Faith is the bridge between thought and form, the single thread through which the invisible becomes visible. In the records I was permitted to see, this law was never broken, only misunderstood. Every creation, whether of light or of shadow, begins in belief. The soul is a mirror, and whatever image it holds with certainty will soon be reflected outward into experience. This is why those who fear continuously attract what they dread, and those who trust steadily draw what they affirm. The mind is not a passive observer, it is the builder, shaping every hour according to the pattern it carries within. Faith is the hand of the builder, and doubt is the tremor that makes the wall collapse. To live without faith is to live in unfinished construction, surrounded by fragments of uncompleted dreams. The great lesson given to me was that divine law never pauses to pity ignorance. The law of gravity does not cease for the man who falls, and the law of mind does not wait for the doubter to catch up. Whatever vibration dominates manifests. This is why the scriptures warn that a double-minded man receives nothing. It is not a punishment. It is the simple consequence of an unstable pattern. When thought and feeling move in opposite directions, creation cancels itself. But when faith aligns the two, even the smallest seed of belief becomes unstoppable. Christ called it a mustard seed. Yet I saw it in vision as a spark so bright it pierced the fabric of limitation. Faith compresses eternity into an instant. The soul that learns this begins to speak with authority. Its words carry the same tone that moved the waters in the beginning, because it speaks from the center of divine certainty. There is a difference between reciting truth and knowing it. Many say God will provide, yet few rest in that vibration long enough to see provision appear. The words themselves have no power until the soul behind them becomes one with what it declares. This is why the old prophets spoke rarely, but when they spoke, the world shifted. They had aligned thought, emotion, and will. That alignment is the secret of all miracles. When I asked how man might train this alignment, the answer came through obedience in small things. Every time you choose trust over anxiety, you carve a new channel in the soul. Every time you act as though the promise is already fulfilled, you widen that channel. Over time, faith ceases to be effort, it becomes nature. It is no longer practiced, it simply is. Then, when a great trial comes, the soul stands unmoved, not because it resists, but because it has already seen beyond appearances. The storm still rages, but faith recognizes that the storm itself obeys the same God. I've seen in the records that no act of faith ever ends in loss. Sometimes the outer form changes, but the inner gain is absolute. For faith is the seed of eternal increase. Even when the visible result fails, the unseen self grows stronger, more radiant, more attuned to its source. This is why those who seem to lose everything often awaken to a peace they could not find before. Their faith has shifted from outcomes to essence. They no longer need proof because they have touched presence. In this way, faith matures from transaction to communion. At first, man believes to obtain. Later, he believes to become. The early stages of faith are always mixed with desire, yet the higher stages are pure surrender, to believe not for gain, but because truth cannot be otherwise. That is mastery. It is the state of Enoch, who walked with God and was no more, for his consciousness had become identical with divine order. Faith in its fullness does not wait for reality to change. It perceives that reality has never been broken. I tell you, there is no higher knowledge than this, that what is real in spirit remains real regardless of appearances. When this awareness becomes steady, miracles are no longer interruptions of law. They are expressions of it. The same hand that holds galaxies steady moves gently through the life of every believer. To the one who understands faith, nothing is impossible because nothing is divided. And the soul that reaches that unity no longer prays for light, it shines. I was shown that faith is not given to man as ornament, but as instrument, a living power by which heaven works through earth. In the silence of meditation, when I was taken beyond the veil of thought, I beheld the law written in light, that every act of true belief becomes a pathway through which the divine mind touches matter. From that moment, I understood that faith is not the cry of the weak, but the language of creators. It was revealed to me how in the beginning the sons of men were taught to walk by inner sight, and their hearts were still one with the vibration of the source. They knew that every promise of God contained within itself the power to fulfill itself, and so they spoke, and it was done, for their will was aligned with the will. But when doubt entered, that holy harmony was broken, and the eyes of man began to look outward for proof of what could only be known within. The fall from paradise was not the loss of the garden, but the loss of that inward certainty. Ever since, the Spirit of God has whispered through prophets, saints, and dreamers, calling man back to trust. Each generation is given its own test, its own wilderness, its own unseen road where reason cannot lead and only faith can walk. When I looked into the records, I saw that those who answered that call were not chosen for their strength, but for their willingness. For God delights not in perfection, but in surrender, and faith is the surrender that turns weakness into channel. Abraham heard the voice before he knew its name, and he obeyed. Noah built when the skies were silent, and he endured. Moses walked into darkness, guided only by a pillar of light. These were not legends, but living patterns, written into the soul of every seeker. They are the same vibrations that speak to you now in quieter forms. Trust when there is no sign. Build when no one believes. Walk though the way be dark. In those moments when I entered the deeper trance, I saw the faces of these ancient ones, and around them was not splendor but calm. Their faith was not the trembling hope of the fearful, but the steady knowing of those who remember their source. I was told, faith is the remembrance of the eternal law within time. And I knew then that all true believing is remembering, for the soul already knows what the mind has forgotten. The child trusts the parent not because of proof, but because of presence. And so the awakened soul trusts the Creator because it feels that presence even when sight fails. Faith is the bridge across the unseen river, and only by stepping upon it does it become solid. In every age, man has tried to replace that bridge with systems, rituals, and knowledge. Yet the river remains uncrossed until the heart dares to believe. I say to you, knowledge without faith is like a lamp without oil. It shines for a moment and then goes out. But faith, even without knowledge, becomes light itself. In the readings, many would ask me, what must I do to gain faith? And the answer was always the same. Use what you have. For faith grows only by being exercised. It is not a gift dropped from heaven, but a muscle of the soul that strengthens through obedience. Each act of trust plants a seed in the invisible, and each seed will find its season to bloom. Some pray for great faith, but the law gives it only in small portions that must be used. When a man obeys the smallest whisper of good, greater trust is added to him, until one day he no longer questions, he simply walks. I have seen the glow of such souls in the unseen world. Their aura shines like morning over still waters, for their will and God's will are one. The power that made the stars works through their quiet certainty. They have ceased to beg and begun to become. Their prayers are not requests, but recognition. Father, I thank thee that thou hast already heard me. Such words are not arrogance, but alignment. They do not move heaven to act. They reveal that heaven was acting all along. So it is written in the hidden law, and so it is lived by those who remember. Therefore I tell you, faith is not only believing in God, it is believing with God. It is His thought moving through your thought, His breath within your breath. And when that unity is restored, the soul begins to speak again the language of creation. Then mountains are not moved by command, but by harmony, for the mountain itself yields to the vibration of divine certainty. And I say this as one who has seen it. Faith is not distant. It is within you now, waiting not to be found, but to be awakened, for it is the original light with which the Creator endowed every living soul. In the records it is written that Abel gave of his firstborn the best, not the remainder. He gave not because he calculated, but because he knew the principle of return. What is given in faith cannot be lost. Abel understood something his brother did not, that every offering to God is not a trade but a mirror, revealing what already lives within the giver. When I was shown the record of his act, I saw that his gift glowed not because of the lamb itself, but because of the vibration that surrounded it. It shimmered like gold in the unseen, pulsing with a rhythm of pure trust. Cain's gift, by contrast, appeared heavy, dim, clothed in hesitation. The same altar received both, yet one was accepted and the other turned away, not by preference, but by resonance. Divine law responds not to the object, but to the frequency of the heart. Abel gave from wholeness, Cain from calculation, and the difference between them became the first revelation of faith's true nature. What is given with fear bears the energy of loss, but what is given with trust carries the power of multiplication. The moment Abel offered his best, the principle of return was set in motion. I saw the law written in the fabric of light. What is offered in love cannot be diminished. To give with joy is to enter the circuit of divine flow. Every current that goes out from such giving returns magnified, because love seeks its own reflection. This is the secret that the ancient ones understood when they built their altars. They were not appeasing a distant deity. They were aligning themselves with the rhythm of creation. The altar was the meeting point between spirit and matter, the place where invisible truth became visible action. And faith was the fire that made the offering alive. Without faith, ritual is only smoke. With faith, even a handful of grain becomes radiant before God. In my visions, I saw that Abel's altar was not a single stone, but the human heart itself. The flame upon it burns whenever love gives without demand, whenever the soul offers its best without fear of scarcity. Such giving is creative, for it joins the divine economy where nothing is wasted, nothing withheld. The blood of the offering was the symbol of life poured out willingly, the essence of faith expressed through action. This is why the voice of Abel's blood was said to cry from the ground. It was the eternal vibration of true offering, calling men to remember that faith cannot die. Cain's heart, bound by self-interest, could not bear that sound. In the vision, I saw his envy not as hatred, but as the agony of separation. The moment he withheld his best, he fell out of rhythm with life itself, and the dissonance within him became unbearable. This is the hidden mystery of sin, not moral rebellion, but disharmony with divine order. Every time the soul clings to possession, it steps out of music and into noise. Abel's death, therefore, was not defeat, but translation. His body fell, but his vibration remained, establishing the first covenant of faith through blood, the principle that what is truly given can never perish. The law of return did not fail. It fulfilled itself in another realm. His story was written not to glorify suffering, but to show that trust cannot be slain. Even when form is destroyed, essence endures. This pattern has repeated through all ages. Those who give their best, knowing they may not receive it back from men, always receive it back from life. The energy of pure faith circles the universe and finds its way home. What you release in alignment with divine purpose cannot be lost, for it belongs already to the eternal. The act of withholding, however, creates stagnation. It builds walls around the soul and shuts out the flow of blessing. This is why fear corrodes, why greed decays, why resentment dries the well of life. The universe mirrors the state of the giver. Faith opens, fear closes, and between those two movements all destiny unfolds. I have counseled many souls who wondered why their prayers remained unanswered, and the Spirit always replied, "You have not yet offered the best." The best is not always gold or labor or possession. Sometimes it is forgiveness. Sometimes it is surrender. Sometimes it is the willingness to trust again after being betrayed. The best is whatever the heart still clings to. When that is laid upon the altar, heaven answers instantly, for the law cannot resist completeness. The moment you give without reservation, you draw the likeness of God into your act. Abel's faith was simple. He believed the unseen was more real than the visible, that the source would sustain him beyond the sacrifice. That is why his offering ascended like fragrance, while Cain's remained heavy upon the earth. God did not curse Cain. Cain cursed himself by withholding. The law is impartial, it magnifies whatever it touches. Abel proved that love is never impoverished by generosity, that loss cannot touch what is offered in faith. When I asked in the silence what lesson his story carried for this generation, I was told, "Teach them to give their first, not their remainder." The principle remains unchanged. Whatever you place first upon the altar, your time, your strength, your trust, becomes consecrated and multiplied. Whatever you give last becomes shadow and dust. Abel's story is not about blood, but about order, the divine order that faith restores. Give from fullness, not fear. Offer your best not because you must, but because the law of life is giving. Faith is not proved by what you receive, but by what you release. And when you release without hesitation, heaven itself takes note, for the same light that once accepted Abel's gift still shines, waiting for each soul to remember that true offering is not sacrifice, it is creation. Enoch was shown to me as a light among lights, quiet yet unyielding, whose faith did not roar like thunder, but shimmered like dawn across still waters. He did not build kingdoms or command legions, for his power was not of dominion, but of alignment. To walk with God is not to strive toward him, but to move in rhythm with his heartbeat. Enoch understood this law, and because he lived within it, death could not claim him. The record revealed that every step he took was an act of correspondence between the seen and the unseen. His thoughts were measured, his words weighed, his silences filled with communion. He did not ask for signs, for his very being had become a sign. There is a level of faith that asks, another that trusts, and a higher one still that knows. Enoch lived in that knowing. He no longer sought the presence of God, he carried it. And when the mortal frame could no longer contain that vibration, it dissolved, and he was not, for God took him. I have read many souls who speak of ascension as though it were reward, but in the divine record it is the inevitable result of harmony. When vibration and source become identical, form no longer separates. That is the mystery of translation, the moment spirit becomes too luminous for shadow to endure. Enoch's life was not a story of escape from death, but a demonstration of mastery over it. He proved that faith, when matured into continual awareness, erases the boundary between time and eternity. In my visions, I saw him walking upon a landscape not made of earth but of energy, and with each step the world responded. Rocks softened, air brightened, trees turned toward him as if recognizing kin. For the man who walks in harmony does not command nature, he resonates with it. Every creature feels the current of that peace. I saw that even the elements recognize faith, for faith restores the original frequency of Eden, where man and creation breathed in unison. This is the faith that does not plead but perceives. It is no longer prayer as request, but prayer as participation in divine rhythm. The Spirit once said to me, to walk with God is to cease opposing him. And I knew that Enoch's path was the living expression of that truth. He offered no resistance to the flow of the eternal, no rebellion, no striving. His surrender was perfect, not in passivity but in transparency. The light flowed through him unbroken, and wherever he went, order followed. In this world, men seek miracles as proof, but the one who walks in harmony becomes the miracle itself. The air around such a soul carries healing. The silence within him speaks wisdom. His presence becomes prayer answered before it is spoken. Enoch reached that state not through discipline alone, but through remembrance. He remembered that he was never separate. The soul that remembers this truth ceases to chase God and begins to reveal him. I have seen, in the subtle planes, how faith begins as spark and ends as radiance. At first it is belief, later it becomes communion, and finally it merges into identity. When faith reaches identity, man and God are no longer two. That is when mortality ends. Enoch walked until the rhythm of the infinite absorbed him, not as an event of disappearance, but as completion. The scripture says, he walked with God and was not. Yet the deeper record shows he still walks, not upon the dust of earth, but across the current of living consciousness. He became part of that great cloud of witnesses, guiding unseen, whispering through intuition, reminding souls that death is only dissonance and harmony is life eternal. The power that dissolved his body was not fire, but frequency. When the vibration of faith overtakes the vibration of flesh, matter itself yields to spirit. This is no myth, but cosmic law. Every cell sings according to the consciousness it contains. When thought vibrates in unity with divine thought, it transcends decay. This is why faith heals, why peace extends life, why love restores the body. Enoch's translation was not exception, but demonstration. The same potential lives within every soul. I have seen it as a spark at the core of the human aura, a flame that brightens with every act of alignment, every thought surrendered, every fear released. Those who live from that center need no miracles. They are miracles. Their footsteps leave patterns of order where others see only confusion. I tell you this plainly. To walk with God is not to retreat from the world, but to transform the ground beneath your feet. Wherever Enoch went, heaven followed. The very air carried witness to his purity. When he spoke, creation listened, for his voice no longer opposed the universal chord. He had tuned himself to the key of eternity. I have often pondered how such faith could be lived again in a world of noise and haste, and the answer is simple though difficult. Begin by silencing rebellion. Each complaint, each anxious thought, each act of fear sets the soul out of rhythm. But every quiet surrender, every grateful breath, every act of forgiveness tunes it again. To walk with God is not beyond reach. It begins with the next thought you choose to align with truth instead of illusion. Faith in its highest form is not effort, it is resonance. When your inner vibration matches divine will, the current carries you effortlessly through every circumstance. Enoch's secret was not his holiness, but his harmony. He lived as melody, and when the song was complete, it did not end. It rose beyond hearing. The world called it disappearance, but heaven called it return. I saw his record close, not with death, but with light folding into light, the name Enoch vanishing into the soundless word that began all worlds. And the lesson remained written in the silence. Walk with God, and you too will discover that the journey never ends, it only changes form. Noah obeyed before the clouds gathered, and that is what set him apart. In the records I was shown, his obedience vibrated across dimensions, shaping a field of light around him long before a drop of rain fell. The command came not as thunder, but as knowing, a wordless certainty in the deep heart. Others laughed, for they saw no storm, no sign of threat, and thus they judged him by appearances. But faith never waits for proof. It acts because truth has already spoken. The foolishness of faith is wisdom to the soul, for the unseen is always the cause, and the visible only the echo. Noah built day after day, plank upon plank, sealing each seam not only with pitch but with prayer. Every hammer strike was a declaration that divine warning is reality enough. I saw in the inner record that the ark was more than wood. It was vibration, a form of energy woven through obedience. When a soul acts in harmony with higher law, the very atoms of its world begin to reassemble around safety. That is the mystery of spiritual protection. It is built, not bestowed. Noah did not earn favor. He aligned with law. He understood that divine guidance, once given, is not subject to public opinion. The laughter of the crowd was the test of his frequency. Each mockery strengthened the tone of his resolve. To obey when evidence is absent is to become a co-creator with God, and creation itself responds to such resonance. The animals that gathered were drawn not by chance, but by the magnetism of obedience. For everything in creation answers to order, and the ark was order made visible in a world of chaos. Noah's faith became gravitational. In the vision I was shown, every species moved toward that vibration, compelled by a silent command that spoke through the soul of one man. The law was simple. What aligns with the divine survives the storm. This principle is eternal. The floods of water were but symbols of inner inundation, fear, corruption, and the noise of disbelief. Yet one soul in alignment can anchor the pattern for generations. The Spirit said to me, "Every age has its flood, and every faithful heart its ark. The modern flood is confusion, distraction, the endless roar of voices that drown the inner call. But obedience still builds safety. Each time you trust the inner prompting instead of the outer noise, you place another beam in your ark. Each prayer spoken in surrender becomes another wall sealed against despair. And when the waters of loss or doubt begin to rise, that structure holds. In the subtle plane, I have seen how souls who live in faith radiate an atmosphere of stability even in crisis. Fear may rage around them, yet within they remain afloat, carried by the buoyancy of obedience. Noah's story is a mirror of consciousness itself. The ark is the mind attuned to divine order. The animals are the instincts brought under control. The flood is the emotion purified by trial. When faith commands and obedience follows, the whole being becomes sanctuary. The world may dissolve, but the soul remains anchored in the rhythm of God. I asked once, why must obedience precede understanding? And the answer came, because understanding is born of obedience. The mind cannot grasp truth until it has walked it. Noah did not wait to comprehend rain before he built. He built, and through building, he learned what rain meant. This is the discipline of faith, to act while logic still protests, to trust that the inner instruction carries its own proof. I saw that heaven always gives warning before transformation, but few listen, for the warning comes as whisper, not decree. Those who ignore it call the obedient foolish, until the flood vindicates the faithful. Yet the purpose of the flood was never destruction, but cleansing. Old forms must break for new harmony to rise. The ark was not escape, but preservation of essence, the continuity of life through transition. So too with the soul. When trials come, they wash away the husks of pride and fear, leaving the seed of spirit untouched within its vessel of obedience. Noah emerged into a new world, not because he was favored, but because he had become fit. Faith had refined his vibration until he matched the frequency of renewal. When he stepped out of the ark, the air itself recognized him. A covenant was set in the sky, not for him alone, but as reminder to all generations that divine law remembers those who trust before seeing. The rainbow, I was shown, is not only a promise of mercy, but a map of energy, the sevenfold spectrum of consciousness returning to balance after chaos. Each color corresponds to a virtue forged during the storm: red for courage, orange for obedience, yellow for faith, green for compassion, blue for truth, indigo for insight, violet for surrender. When the soul walks through trial and holds its harmony, those colors awaken within it. That is the inner covenant. In the readings I gave, many souls asked how to be protected from calamity, and the answer was always the same: build your ark daily. The ark is prayer practiced when no crisis calls for it. It is gratitude spoken when nothing seems given. It is kindness extended when the world is cruel. Every act of alignment adds substance to your vessel. And when fear surges, you will find yourself already carried. Noah's obedience is the blueprint for survival of spirit in any age. He proved that divine law is practical, that faith is not fantasy but technology of the soul. He did not escape judgment. He embodied order. The same water that destroyed the wicked lifted him higher, because he floated by faith while others sank in resistance. This is the mystery I was shown. Calamity and deliverance are the same event, experienced differently according to vibration. To the fearful, the flood is punishment. To the faithful, purification. The world you live in will always contain both. The question is not whether storms will come, but whether you have built your ark within. And I tell you now, as one who has seen through time, that every prayer, every obedient act, every moment you choose trust over fear, drives another nail into that eternal vessel. When the floods rise, and they will, you will not be lost, for faith floats and obedience steers. Abraham stepped into the unknown. Sarah believed against the clock of nature. Together they show that faith is both journey and endurance. I was shown the record of Abraham and Sarah as one long thread of divine patience woven through the tapestry of human doubt, a pattern that repeats itself in every generation that must wait for what cannot yet be seen. The vision came to me in silence, and I beheld a man standing beneath a sky so vast it seemed to swallow his questions. God had spoken to him once, not twice, not continually, but once, and from that single word he built an entire life. He left his homeland, his father's idols, his familiar stars, and stepped into the unknown, guided only by a promise that no human tongue could verify. There was no map, no proof, only vibration, the certainty of an unseen covenant echoing through his soul. That is faith in its purest form, movement born from hearing, obedience without evidence. Abraham trusted the path because he trusted the voice. He did not ask for explanation, because explanation is the crutch of those who fear. His trust was raw, unpolished, yet absolute. In the records I saw that every step he took was answered by creation itself, for when a man walks in faith, the ground beneath him arranges to fulfill the promise. Stones shift, doors appear, and even time bends to accommodate obedience. But faith that journeys must also learn to wait, and here Sarah became the mirror of endurance. She believed not because her body allowed it, but because the word had been spoken. I saw her in vision, sitting at the tent door, her hands aged, her heart weary, her laughter edged with disbelief, and yet that laughter itself became prophecy. For the Spirit said to me, even unbelieving laughter can carry the seed of faith when it touches divine promise. The child was conceived not in youth, but in surrender. The womb that was closed became a sign that God's creative power is not bound by human decline. Abraham and Sarah were two sides of one mystery, faith moving outward into action and faith turning inward into rest. He walked until his strength became trust in motion. She waited until her waiting became worship. Their union revealed that faith is not haste, it is rhythm. It breathes with divine timing, slow but certain, hidden yet alive. In the ancient record, I saw how heaven kept silence over them for years, not in neglect, but in preparation. For faith must mature before fulfillment, or the promise will crush the vessel that receives it. The long delay was mercy disguised as absence. Each dawn that brought no child was chiseling away the last fragments of self-reliance, teaching them that the promise belonged not to their flesh but to their alignment. When the angel came and Sarah laughed, the heavens did not condemn her. They answered with joy, for laughter, even mixed with doubt, is still movement toward trust. In that laughter, disbelief dissolved into wonder, and wonder is the doorway of miracle. God delights not in solemn striving, but in expectant joy, for joy is the sound of creation recognizing itself. Faith that has forgotten how to rejoice is not faith, but labor. I was told in spirit, when the soul rejoices before it sees, creation is already conceived. This is why the child was named Isaac Laughter, because divine manifestation is the laughter of God made flesh. The birth was not simply a family's blessing. It was the first human echo of resurrection, proof that life can bloom from the impossible. I saw how the moment Sarah held her son, the vibration of faith across the world changed. It became tangible. Every barren heart, every broken dream, every delayed prayer found new pattern in that birth. It established the law that divine timing is never denial. The clock of heaven does not run late, it runs deep. While they waited, something greater was being built within them, a faith able to carry generations. Abraham's trust would one day become the seed of nations, and Sarah's endurance would become the model for every soul that must believe when all evidence says no. I have seen in the Akashic field how many souls carry that same test today. They are told to hold a vision long after it seems dead, to believe when reason mocks, to laugh through tears and still give thanks. These are the heirs of Sarah, the ones who are learning that faith is not measured by speed but by stamina. The promise is never lost. It is incubated. Even delay is divine gestation. In the readings I was shown that impatience fractures creation, but patience solidifies it. Abraham's line was secured not when he left his home, but when he waited without bitterness. The waiting was the altar, and the sacrifice was control. Every time he resisted the urge to force the promise, he hammered another nail into the foundation of blessing. Faith that moves is powerful, but faith that waits is indestructible. The world calls delay failure, but heaven calls it formation. I've heard the whisper in trance, the promise delayed is the promise multiplied. When fulfillment finally arrives, it comes not as what was once desired, but as something infinitely greater, infused with the wisdom born of waiting. That is why the child of faith was laughter, not labor. Joy is the final proof that trust has matured. In that joy, heaven and earth meet. Abraham's journey and Sarah's endurance form the twin pillars of all true faith: action and rest, movement and surrender, courage and patience. One without the other collapses under time. Together they sustain the temple of trust. And I tell you, their story is not ancient history. It is the living pattern of your own soul. Every promise within you must pass through the same sequence: hearing, obeying, waiting, rejoicing. Do not curse the silence between revelation and manifestation, for it is the silence that grows the seed. Faith that waits without despair becomes creative fire. It turns barrenness into birthplace, laughter into prophecy. And when the promise finally takes form, you will understand what they learned under the desert sky, that joy is not reward after faith. It is faith itself fulfilled, the laughter of God echoing through human breath, saying once more, "Is anything too hard for the Lord?" Eternal faith begins where sight ends, and I have seen through the records that the heroes of old did not die in disappointment, but in revelation. They saw what others could not. They perceived that the end of the flesh was not the end of the journey, but its unveiling. When I was in the trance state, the Spirit revealed that the earth is not a destination, but a proving ground, a vast classroom for the soul to remember what it already knows. Every trial, every unanswered prayer, every delay is part of the divine curriculum through which the eternal self learns mastery. Abraham, Moses, Sarah, and the saints who followed did not live for reward, but for realization. They looked toward a country not built with hands, and though they walked on sand and stone, their hearts were already dwelling in the higher country. To them, death was not departure, but graduation. They were pilgrims of the infinite, souls who carried heaven within while surrounded by dust. This is the secret of eternal faith. It does not depend on fulfillment here, because it knows fulfillment is inevitable elsewhere. When faith has matured, it no longer bargains with life, it simply continues, because continuity is its nature. I have seen in the Akashic field that what a man believes in his final hour becomes the vibration that draws him into his next sphere. Those who trust, even as they lose all else, awaken beyond the veil in radiant clarity, for faith has built their dwelling place before they arrive. This is why it is said that faith is the substance of things hoped for. It is literal substance, forming the architecture of the unseen world. What you hold in steadfast belief becomes the landscape of your eternity. The souls who cling to bitterness build walls, while those who trust build light. Every act of faith here, no matter how small, shapes your future condition there. I was once shown a vision of souls ascending after death. Some moved swiftly, their auras expanding like dawn, because they had learned to believe without seeing. Others lingered near the shadows of the earth, still bound by the habit of doubt, their faith undeveloped, their sight still veiled. And I heard the voice say, "As the man thinketh in his heart, so is he, not only in life, but beyond it." The record shows that the faith that endures without reward is the highest vibration, for it mirrors divine constancy. God's creative energy never doubts itself. It simply continues. When the soul remembers this, it becomes co-creator, shaping worlds through trust. The faith that endures beyond results is the measure of how much eternity has awakened in time. The patriarchs understood this, which is why they died in faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off. They were not deceived by delay, for they saw the pattern complete before the thread was tied. This is the consciousness of eternity, to know that what is begun in spirit must finish in spirit, though centuries intervene. I have read the records of many lives who carried this understanding. Those who act in faith when all evidence fails create bridges between dimensions. Their trust becomes a living current that others unconsciously follow. That is why saints and prophets remain alive in influence long after death they built in eternal material. Their words and deeds vibrate in the higher field, calling others upward. Faith is not sentiment. It is the spiritual law of continuity in motion. In one reading I was told, "What you believe through darkness becomes your light." The world tests this law through disappointment, loss, and unanswered prayer, for these are the conditions in which eternal faith is forged. Temporal faith trusts while the reward is visible, but eternal faith persists when all appearances deny it. This is the soul remembering eternity while still clothed in flesh. It knows that what is unseen is more real than what can decay. I saw how such souls walk through the world lightly, as if the ground beneath them were transparent, because they recognize the impermanence of form. They are not careless, they are free. Their peace is not indifference, but recognition that life extends beyond all graves, and that every apparent ending is simply an entry into wider awareness. Faith for them is not belief in miracles, it is participation in the eternal process of becoming. The Spirit once said to me, "The unseen is not later, it is now, and faith is the eye that sees it." When this eye opens, the soul ceases to measure worth by success or failure. It ceases to demand outcomes. It learns that obedience, trust, and love are their own completion. The heroes of old were masters of this. They walk by inner sight, their gaze fixed upon the eternal horizon, and though they died as men, they live as principles. The world remembers them as figures of history, but heaven records them as energies of continuity, still shaping consciousness through the vibration they left behind. I tell you this truth. Faith does not end at the grave. It expands. It crosses dimensions, pulling the soul toward its source like gravity draws water toward the sea. Every soul must one day learn this lesson, that heaven is not a place reached by death, but a condition reached by belief. Eternal faith is the soul's remembering of its home while still walking through exile. It is the calm that says, "Even if I see nothing, God still is." Such faith no longer needs promises, for it has already found the promiser. It no longer seeks heaven, for it carries heaven's pattern within. The records confirm that the faith which endures without sight is the only power that survives transition. All else, wealth, knowledge, form, melts away, but faith, being of divine substance, remains. It is the thread that pulls the soul from world to world, from ignorance to illumination, until at last it realizes there is no separation at all. This is the faith of the eternal, to see through the veil of time and find that the face beyond it is your own reflection shining back with the light of God. Abraham's greatest test was not in leaving his homeland, but in offering back what had been given. It is written in the records that faith, once matured, must face its own reflection, the willingness to surrender the very thing it prayed for. The voice that had once promised a son now commanded a sacrifice, and I saw in that paradox the secret of divine training. God never takes what he has not first multiplied in meaning. Abraham rose early, not because he understood, but because trust had become his nature. The fire and the knife were symbols, not of cruelty, but of completion. When a soul reaches the summit of faith, the question changes from will you believe to will you release? In trance, I saw Abraham's walk up the mountain as the journey every soul must take, ascending from possession to offering, from gift to surrender. Isaac represented more than a son. He was the embodiment of promise, the visible evidence of divine faithfulness. To lay him down was to let go of certainty itself. Yet faith, at its highest, no longer clings to outcomes. It rests in the character of the giver. This is the mystery. The same hand that gives can also demand, not in cruelty, but in trust, that the soul has grown strong enough to know that life cannot truly lose what is rooted in God. The test was not for Abraham's information, but for his transformation. Heaven already knew his heart. It was he who needed to see that his faith had crossed the threshold from dependence to devotion. When he lifted the knife, he cut through illusion, the illusion that God's promise depends on circumstance. The ram caught in the thicket was not an afterthought. It was always there, waiting at the intersection of obedience and revelation. The law is precise. Provision appears only where surrender is complete. I saw that the mountain itself held the vibration of that moment. It became the template of substitution, the prophecy of the cross, long before the world knew its form. For in the future, another father would walk the same mountain in spirit, but this time there would be no ram, no reprieve. The son would be offered, not to test faith, but to fulfill it. The pattern Abraham enacted became the cosmic rehearsal of redemption. Every soul that surrenders its Isaac becomes participant in that eternal exchange. Fear for trust, possession for peace, death for resurrection. I have read the records of many who have reached that inner mountain. For some, Isaac is a dream that must die so the soul may awaken. For others, it is a person, a career, a calling, a beloved illusion that has outlived its purpose. Whatever the form, the law is constant. What is laid down in faith returns transformed. Abraham called that place, "The Lord will provide," for he understood that supply is not what comes after obedience. It is what obedience reveals. When the heart opens its hand, heaven fills it with what cannot be lost. This is the paradox of faith. Surrender multiplies. I have seen it again and again. The more a soul releases, the more the universe aligns to replace loss with revelation. Abraham's altar became the gateway through which divine abundance still flows. Every act of true giving partakes of that same current. It is not sacrifice in the sense of deprivation. It is the joyous relinquishment of limitation. The soul that learns this lives in freedom. Fear binds, but faith unbinds, and surrender is the key that unlocks immortality. In that moment on Moriah, the veil between human and divine thinned to transparency. Abraham glimpsed the rhythm by which all creation operates. Everything flows out to return renewed. This is why no act of faith is wasted, even when it feels like loss. What we offer to God does not perish. It evolves. The seed that dies becomes the tree that feeds a generation. The relationship relinquished in obedience becomes the love that sustains lifetimes. The dream surrendered in faith becomes the wisdom that guides nations. This is the alchemy of divine reciprocity. The Spirit once said to me, "You do not give to lose. You give to enter the circuit of eternal exchange." Abraham's obedience opened that circuit for all who would come after. His faith became hereditary, not merely biological, but vibrational. Every soul that trusts through sacrifice carries his signature. And I tell you this, God never delights in pain, but he delights in proof that love has matured beyond fear. When the soul can say, "Take even this, for you are my portion," heaven responds with expansion. For the one who gives up all is the one to whom all is given. I have seen in the records that some souls come into life not to gain, but to release, to show others how to die, to the lesser self that the greater may arise. Abraham's test marks the transition from faith that receives to faith that returns. It is not beginner's faith, but master's faith. The beginning of faith says, God will give. The perfection of faith says, God is enough. That is why after the altar, Abraham was never the same. He had crossed the line between man and friend of God. He no longer lived from promise, but from presence. This is the culmination of every soul's journey, to reach the point where even the holiest gift is no longer the goal, for the giver has become the treasure. When faith reaches that height, fear ceases forever. In that stillness, the ram bleats from the thicket, and the soul hears its own echo returning from eternity, whispering the same truth that carried Abraham through the storm and the silence alike, that nothing given in love is ever lost, and nothing surrendered in faith fails to return, multiplied, purified, eternal. Faith, I was shown, is not completed when it receives what it hopes for, but when it can still stand after everything hoped for has been taken away. The final refinement of faith is endurance in silence. When I looked into the records, I saw that the souls who have reached mastery are not those who were spared trial, but those who kept their vibrations steady while heaven seemed absent. Every era has its wilderness, and every seeker must walk through it. After Abraham came Job, and through Job the pattern was revealed again, that faith untested is still incomplete. Job lost everything that could be lost: wealth, family, health, reputation, yet his faith remained like a hidden ember beneath the ashes. He cried, he questioned, he cursed the day of his birth, yet he did not deny the source. And the Spirit said to me, "This is what faith looks like when stripped of reward. In the unseen, I saw light around him, dim yet unwavering, the glow of endurance without understanding." Faith at this stage ceases to be belief and becomes substance. It no longer depends on feeling, but on identity. Job's trial was not punishment, but revelation. He was being shown that his relationship with the divine was real, even when the blessings vanished. Every soul, if it grows long enough, reaches this point, the place where prayer echoes without answer, where silence feels endless. Many turn back there, but those who remain discover that silence is not absence. It is initiation. The soul must learn to hear God not only in the voice, but in the pause. When the outer forms collapse, the inner foundation is revealed. In trance, I saw that the true nature of faith is like a crystal buried within the heart. Pressure and fire alone can bring out its brilliance. When all comforts are gone, when certainty is shattered, when even hope falters, what remains is the pure awareness that being itself cannot be destroyed. That awareness is the essence of faith. Job's restoration was not a reward for patience. It was the reflection of his transformation. The universe mirrored his renewed alignment, as it always does. Once he ceased demanding explanation and began seeing with reverence, his world reassembled around him. This is the same law that governs every soul. When the lesson is integrated, reality reorders itself. In another vision, I saw that the highest faith is not loud, but still. It does not argue or prove, it simply abides. The prophets, after their great works, always entered periods of obscurity where nothing moved and no vision came. Even Elijah hid in the cave and asked to die, yet in that darkness he heard the still small voice. I was told that the silence between revelations is the womb of power, for faith is conceived in waiting. Those who run from silence never mature in strength. It is easy to trust when energy flows, but mastery is born when nothing flows and trust remains. This endurance turns faith from practice into essence. It becomes as natural as breathing, no longer dependent on mood or miracle. I was shown that this endurance has its own fragrance in the spirit world. It smells of steady light, a sweetness that angels recognize. Souls who have borne long waiting carry it like a perfume, and wherever they go, rest follows. Their presence quiets storms, not because they command them, but because they no longer resist them. Such souls no longer seek to control. They consent. This is the faith that transforms pain into wisdom. They do not interpret loss as betrayal, but as refinement. Every disappointment becomes a chisel, every sorrow a polishing cloth, every delay a teacher. They have learned that God's silence speaks through vibration, not word. The surface mind calls it emptiness. The deeper self knows it as fullness in disguise. This is why the mystic smiled through hardship and why the seers remained calm while nations fell. They had touched the rhythm beneath appearances. Their faith was no longer situational, it had become ontological. In the records, I saw them described not as believers but as knowers. Belief wavers, knowing remains, and yet such knowing cannot be taught. It must be lived. Faith matures only through contrast. Without darkness, the light of certainty could never reveal its depth. So it is with every seeker. First comes promise, then fulfillment, then loss, and finally remembrance. The cycle repeats until faith is purified of all demand. The soul that reaches this state no longer prays, "Give me, but make me." It ceases to measure God by results. It becomes the result, the living proof that consciousness cannot be broken. Even death, I was shown, becomes an ally at this level. For faith that endures beyond the grave transforms death into doorway. The righteous of every tradition discovered this. They walked through fire, exile, hunger, and silence, yet their radiance only grew. What destroyed others refined them. They had become what the scriptures call pillars, points of stability in the vibration of the earth. The power of such souls sustains civilizations. Their prayers do not ask for deliverance, they uphold balance. When I read for those passing through similar trials, I remind them that endurance is not punishment, it is apprenticeship. The soul is learning to hold divine currents steadily, no matter the condition. Once that steadiness is established, even chaos becomes harmless. This is why Christ slept through the storm. He was not indifferent. He was attuned. The boat was his consciousness, the storm his circumstance, and faith his equilibrium. The same potential lies in every soul. To cultivate it, you must train yourself to rest in trust even when the heavens appear brass. The law of cause and effect never fails. It only unfolds in time's rhythm. The outcome you await is already prepared in the unseen. Endurance is the bridge that brings it forth. So hold fast when sight fades. Speak gratitude when you feel nothing. Act with love when no love returns. Each such moment forges your faith into permanence. And when the test concludes, you will find that what you sought was never missing. It was maturing. Then the silence will break, the promise will reappear, and the soul will understand why heaven waited. For the truest faith does not conquer storms. It outlasts them. And in that endurance, the divine within man finally recognizes itself as the same light that never wavers in the heart of God. When I look back through the visions that were shown to me, through all the records of souls that have lived and suffered and believed, I see one golden thread running through them all. Faith, not the kind that demands proof or bargains with heaven, but the quiet, living pulse that endures when every visible thing falls apart. It is the only vibration that never dies, the only energy that crosses death's threshold unchanged. I have spoken of Abraham and Sarah, of Noah, of Enoch, of the unnamed saints who waited without answer, and yet the story beneath their stories is the same, that consciousness must learn to trust its source without seeing it. When the body is stripped, when the heart is broken, when every door closes, faith becomes the final doorway. In trance, I once asked, "What is faith made of?" And the answer came, not in sound, but in light. It is the memory of God within you. And I understood then that faith is not something the soul gains, it is something it remembers. Every trial, every silence, every delay is designed to draw that remembrance out of hiding. To believe without seeing is to remember who you were before you were born. That is why the soul trembles. When truth approaches, it recognizes home. The world calls faith a leap, but I tell you it is a return. It is the spirit finding its own vibration again after long sleep. I have seen how this remembrance changes everything. The man who trusts deeply cannot be enslaved by circumstance. The woman who believes beyond evidence walks as one who carries her own weather. They no longer chase miracles, they become living testimony that the unseen is already here. This is the highest teaching. The divine does not dwell far above, but beats within every heartbeat. To live by faith is to awaken that heartbeat consciously, to see through appearances and recognize divine order, even in chaos. When you do, fear dissolves, and gratitude becomes your natural language. Gratitude is faith matured. It does not thank for gifts, but for existence itself. Those who reach this state no longer pray for deliverance because they have discovered that the deliverer was within them all along. Their lives become quiet rivers, flowing wherever love leads, harming nothing, resisting nothing. In them, heaven and earth reconcile. I have seen such souls in the records, luminous as dawn, and the vibration they leave behind sustains worlds. This is the destiny of all who persist, the transmutation of faith into knowing, of struggle into serenity, of hope into being. The outer world may call it peace, but it is more than peace. It is participation in the eternal rhythm. Every breath, every act, every thought becomes prayer without effort. Nothing is wasted, not even pain, for pain itself becomes light when seen through this lens. I tell you, all the trials of earth are but the friction through which the hidden spark ignites. Once it burns, the soul cannot return to ignorance. It knows now that everything was God wearing disguise, loss, joy, delay, death, all the same presence calling it home. I have witnessed many awakenings, some quiet as dawn, others fierce as fire, but each ended in the same stillness, the same realization that faith was never about reaching God, but allowing Him to be what He already is within you. When the mind ceases to struggle and the heart ceases to fear, the two currents meet, and the soul stands unveiled. That unveiling is salvation, not escape, but recognition. It is the moment when the drop knows itself as ocean, and the seeker realizes there was never a distance to cross. That is the truth I have been committed to share. The kingdom you seek is not ahead, but within, and faith is the key that turns its invisible door. Keep that door open, and life will no longer appear fragmented. Every face will shine as reflection, every hour as teaching, every loss as invitation to trust more deeply. And when at last your body sleeps its final sleep, you will not fall into darkness, but into continuity, for you will awaken in the vibration you have lived. Those who have walked by faith will rise into light because they already carry its frequency. That is the promise I have seen written in the very structure of creation, that nothing trusted is ever wasted, and no act of love ever disappears. In the end, all faith ripens into vision, and all waiting becomes arrival. The soul that once trembled will stand radiant, whispering the words that close every record of human striving, the same words that began it all: I am.